pray. Heavenly Father, may my words be like your words spoken through the prophet Isaiah. As the rain and snow come down from heaven, do not return to it without watering the earth, making it bud and flourish so that it yields seed for the sower and bread for the eater. So it is with the words that go out from my mouth. They will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purposes for which I sent them. Amen. Old Testament lesson is from the book of Genesis. Jacob set out from Beersheba and headed to Haran. When he reached a certain place, he lay down for the night because the sun had gone down. Taking a stone from that place, he placed it under his head and went to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, reaching up to the heavens. And the angels of the Lord were ascending and descending on it. At the top stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. I will give to you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like dust on the earth, and they will spread out to the east and the west, to the north and the south, and all people on earth will be blessed because of you and your descendants. I will watch over you, and I will return you to this place, and I will not leave you until I have done all that I have promised to you. When Jacob woke up from his dream, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early in the morning, Jacob took the stone on which he had placed his head, and he set it up and poured oil on it. He called the place Bethel, although the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow. If the Lord will watch over me and protect me on the journey that I am taking, and give me food to eat and clothes to wear, and return me safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God, and I will set this stone as the house of God. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. This is the story of our people.
And what a story it is.
New Testament lessons from the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus told them another parable. A man sowed good seed in his field. Later, while everyone was asleep, his enemy came and scattered weeds across the field, so that when the wheat grew and sprouted head, the weeds grew up also. His servant said to him, Master, didn't you plant good seed in your field? Where did the weeds come from? He said, an enemy did this. They said, do you want us to go out and pull them up? He said, no. He said, because when you pull them up, you may uproot the wheat also. Let them both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will instruct the harvesters, first collect the weeds into bundles to be burned. Then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn. To the glory of God, this is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Many rankings of the top rock songs of all time, and Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven has been voted number one in many of them. It might have been your class song for some of you. We're doing some research into that. It's on the top 10 on a couple of my personal lists also. I might offend a few of you by saying it's on my list of most overrated songs and most likely to have the station changed when it comes on the radio. I will say, though, that the tune has been going through my head all week as I've been memorizing that text. And I can't wait to begin learning something new so I can flush that out of my subconscious. As long as the next scripture I learn isn't about some kind of bird that wants to be free. At that point, because that was our class song, at that point, I will give up. The story of Jacob's ladder is one that most of us remember from Sunday school or Bible school. It's a rather vivid image of a dream that Jacob has while he's on the run from his brother Esau. But I have to admit that the story that we learned way back when never seemed to make much sense to me. What was the point? Maybe it's a little overrated also, like its namesake modern song. Maybe we need to dig a little bit, get to see the rest of the story. And even though Jacob's name flows off the tongue and runs smoothly through Scripture as one of the esteemed patriarchs of our faith, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, we need to remember that Jacob carries a lot of baggage. Jacob is the younger of the twins born to Isaac and Rebekah, and as such, he should have been subservient to his older brother Esau. But Jacob repeatedly pulls the wool over his brother's eyes. First, he trades a bowl of soup for Esau's birthright. Esau might not have been the sharpest tool in the shed, but that didn't stop Jacob from taking advantage of an opportunity when he saw it. It's pretty obvious that Esau was not starving to death. It was a good deal for Jacob, and it seemed to whet his appetite to try to pull more fast ones whenever he could. Jacob has a willing accomplice in his mother Rebekah. When Isaac, the father, was getting along in years and he knew it was time to give his fatherly blessing to his oldest son, Rebekah and Jacob devised a plan to trick the old man into bestowing his blessing on the younger son. And their plan works. And Isaac is tricked into bestowing the blessing that he had reserved for Esau and giving it to Jacob. And even when Esau shows up shortly after with the wild game his father had requested, and he realized he's been played for a fool again, Esau finds that the blessing that Jacob had been given to Jacob cannot be retracted. Hey, a deal's a deal. Of course, at some point, Jacob is going to have to lie in the bed that he's made. And I imagine that for a time he had to sleep with one eye open to watch out for his brother. But Esau had sworn that he would wait until their father had died, till he would exact revenge on his scheming younger brother. But before the old man sleeps with his fathers, he sends Jacob to Haran, again at the sneaky behest of his mother, so that he might stay clear of his angry brother. Jacob heads for Haran, the ancestral home of Abraham and Sarah, so he'll be safe under the watchful eye of his conniving uncle Laban. Jacob gets his crookedness honestly, maybe the only thing he's ever got honestly. Hopefully he'll find a wife from among the daughters of Laban, who are, of course, his first cousins. If you remember the story of Rachel and Leah, you'll recall that perhaps Jacob has met his match with good old Uncle Laban, but that's a story for another day. So Jacob sets out, alone as far as we know, on his journey to Haran. This is not a Sunday walk in the park, but rather a 500-mile trek through the desert. He's reversing the course his grandparents took from what is now Turkey to the southern area of what is now Israel. This would be a hard journey for anyone, but more so for Jacob, who was more comfortable in the tent than outside. And he'll have lots of time to think about the choices that has set him on this journey, and it'll be over 20 years until he is able to return to his family home. Sometimes there is a steep price to pay, even for a good deal. At some point, as he's fleeing, he stops near the city of Luz. It's not possible to travel in the darkness, so he makes camp for the night. We might laugh at his choice of accessories, but he probably isn't carrying a down pillow with him. And I doubt that his guilty conscience would keep him from getting a sound sleep, so he finds a stone on which to rest his head, and probably tired from the day's travels, he falls fast asleep. In the words of my dad, he was crooked enough to sleep comfortably on a staircase. While Jacob was asleep, the Lord appeared to him in a spectacular dream. He saw the stairway to heaven centuries before Led Zeppelin did. It reached from the earth to the heavens, and the angels of God were coming down to earth and going back up to heaven, back into the presence of God. Jacob can see God at the top of the stairs, and then he hear God speak directly to him. Even though Jacob is the grandson of Abraham and the direct beneficiary of God's covenant with Abraham, it seems as if he's either not been aware of the fact or impressed by it. Obviously, the Bible doesn't record every word that Jacob ever said, but prior to this, he always referred to God as your God, never my God. Now he hears God identify himself, and he hears directly the promise that has been made to his granddad being repeated to him. God promises Jacob that he will watch over him and keep him safe, that the ground on which he was sleeping would be given to him and his descendants, and that his descendants would spread out like dust over the earth, becoming a blessing to all peoples. This is a promise on the part of God. There is no deal involved. There's no quid pro quo. There's no bargaining. There's no prerequisites. It's just grace. The promise has nothing to do with who Jacob is. It's all about who God is. You know, we had the Memorial Day parade in Plumville a couple months ago, and our Sunday school class at the Plumville Church usually hands out free bottles of water and free hot dogs to the people passing by and the band members as they come by. And then once the parade's over, then the cars that have been backed up for a couple of miles on Route 85, they start creeping through. Well, we had a bunch of hot dogs left over this year, so John Gandolfi and a couple of guys took trays of hot dogs just out on the street, and we're just handing them to people coming through. Most of them wouldn't take one, but the ones that did, I thought, they didn't do anything to earn it. They didn't ask for it. They just accepted it, just like grace. Jacob awoke in a state of awe and amazement. He knows he's been in the presence of God and that this is a holy place. He sets up his extra firm pillow as a monument to the place and the occasion. He calls the place Bethel, which means house of God. To this day, there's many churches by that name. Now you know why. House of God. God has made promises to Jacob that go far beyond anything Jacob could fathom. I'm sure he would have been able to understand if God had promised him riches and flocks and herds and land. But to be the father of nations, a blessing to all people on earth, a name which will be remembered and revered for millennia, it would have been hard to wrap your head around that. And Jacob doesn't have to do anything. He's the recipient of immeasurable grace. Now that he knows the promises of God, Jacob finds that old habits are hard to break. He's not just about to take God at his word if he can finagle a way around it, maybe get a better deal. The text says that Jacob made a vow to the Lord, but it's really just another deal. It's an if-then proposition. If God will be with me, and if he watches over me, and if he keeps me safe, and if he returns me to my homeland, and if he gives me food, and if he gives me clothing, then, only then he can be my God. And then he can have this stone as a reminder of this place, and of whatever he gives me, I'll give him back 10%. The text doesn't record it, but I think it would be well within Jacob's character to have tried to bargain down the tithe. I bet he started at half, and if God didn't object, he dropped it to a quarter, and then maybe 20% or 20% net, and then settled on 10. As the rightful heirs to the promises made to Jacob, don't we often exhibit his character when we bargain with God? We might not think we're making a deal, but oftentimes we may be. You've probably heard the story of the two fishermen who were stranded in a boat, and a storm was coming up. And the first said, we better pray. And the first one says, Dear Lord, if you get us out of this, I'll give up smoking. His buddy said, Dear Lord, if you get us out of this mess, I'll give up drinking. The first guy says, Dear Lord, if you get us out of this, his buddy said, wait a minute, I think I see a boat. I well remember discussing the concept of a tithe with a good friend. This is, of course, back when I was working. Should a tithe be considered 10% of my gross pay or of my net? They do take out a lot of taxes. And what about my contribution to Social Security or to a 401k? If we're talking gross, then someday, like today, whenever I collect from those retirement plans, haven't I already taken care of that 10%? Am I thinking like Jacob? Are we all guilty of that from time to time? We may fail to consider that what we earn and what we have are gifts from God, including the talent and the health to earn a living. So is the benefit of living a life long enough to collect on a retirement plan. Do our prayers often fall into the category of bargains? Dear Lord, if you help me get this job, if you let me pick the right lottery numbers, if you get me through this surgery, if you get me out of this mess that I've gotten myself into, then you can be my God. And I'll give you all the praise and glory and honor and 10%. Our trust is that God's grace will be more tenacious than our propensity to make deals. God's grace was more than enough to take the scoundrel Jacob and make him the father of many nations, a blessing to all peoples on earth. Jacob didn't have to strike a deal to become the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, through whom we can trace our faith lineage. God saw him as a cheating sneak and used him as God saw fit regardless. Perhaps because God knew the potential that Jacob had, that God wasn't willing to uproot him and throw him in the burn pile like the weeds in the gospel story. In this day and age, what someone said or did years ago can come back to haunt them. We, unlike God, can get caught up in painting with too broad of a brush. There's been a lot of press lately about historical figures. For certain, many of our founding fathers or other prominent people have had their share of warts, whether they were slave owners or racists or may have had used poor judgment or bad language. None of them were perfect. They all made mistakes. It's that way with our biblical heroes, from Noah to Abraham to Jacob to Moses to David, and on down the line. None had a perfectly clean slate. The measure of a person's life, good or bad, isn't judged on one event or even one period of their life, but as a whole. It's up to God to judge a person's character. Sometimes he lets the weeds grow. It's what the Bible means by grace. Because in the Bible, it's not anything about us that makes God stick with us. It's something about God. And for that, we are all blessed. Thanks be to God.
Thank you for letting us share our worship service with you today. We invite you to join us in person next Sunday at 10:30, or if you prefer, to listen online Sunday afternoon. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at www.marionpress.org and click the Donate Now button. May God bless you and have a great week.